In 1924, John Edgar Hoover, a law school graduate, possessed an exceptional work ethic that led President Calvin Coolidge to put him in charge of America's first national law enforcement agency, the Bureau of Investigation, BOI. The BOI was known for being a corrupt agency, which led Congress to limit its powers. Its agents were not allowed to carry weapons and had to call either the U.S. Marshals or the local police when it came to taking a suspect into custody. Hoover immediately fired agents previously accused of taking bribes and ensured that the ones who were left were mentally and physically fit for their job. The Crime Control Acts of 1934 were passed, stating that if a person kills or assaults a federal officer, transports kidnapped persons, or robs a bank, they would be subject to federal law and could be charged with federal crimes. The Crime Control Acts moved power from state troopers and local sheriffs to the BOI. Increasing its authority, the Bureau of Investigation was renamed the Division of Investigation, DOI. Congress also passed legislation which allowed DOI agents to carry arms and conduct arrests. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow met in January 1930, forming a gang that became responsible for more than 100 felonies within 2 years. On April 13, 1933, in Joplin, Missouri, 2 officers died in a chase after Bonnie and Clyde. The police discovered a roll of film left behind by the couple, who escaped to Texas. The developed photos became a national sensation, giving the bandit couple movie star-like fame. On May 21, 1934, Hoover decided to end the couple's carnage. He collaborated with the Texas Rangers, who formed a posse led by Frank Hamer. Hoover was to supply the posse with the necessary information needed to catch the couple. Frank struck a deal with Henry Methvin, a member of the couple's gang, to set up a trap for them in exchange for the removal of his death penalty. Hoover shared the couple's logistics with Methvin, who set up his truck in their way as if it was broken down. As they stopped to help him, the posse came out of the bushes and shot Bonnie and Clyde dead.
The officers were on the left side of the road, nearest the driver. This explains the fact that Bonnie's body had more bullet holes than Clyde's. Any one of these bullets would have been fatal to both. But after having killed 14 people, most of whom were officers of the law, and having come safely through so many gun battles, it did not seem advisable to fire just one bullet.
On May 28, 1934, notorious bank robber John Dillinger was undergoing plastic surgery to change his facial features after being chased by the police. The DOI had been chasing Dillinger for months with no success. He always found a way to escape just before getting caught. On June 22, 1934, Hoover announced a new category of criminals that applied to only one individual at a time until death or incarceration. The category was called Public Enemy Number 1, and John Dillinger was the first. On July 22, 1934, Dillinger was living in his hideout apartment at 2420 Halsted Street in Chicago. On that day, he went to a movie at the Biograph Theater on Lincoln Avenue. Dillinger was accompanied by his girlfriend Polly Hamilton and his landlady Anna Akaleva. Anna was facing deportation charges. To remain in the United States, she contacted DOI agent Melvin Purvis through her boyfriend Martin Zarkovic, who was a policeman in East Chicago, Indiana, and gave away Dillinger's location. Hoover sent Purvis along with 20 other agents to the theater. They surrounded the place and waited for Dillinger to exit, shooting him dead. Following the successful mission of killing Dillinger, Hoover was on the lookout for another public enemy number 1. He settled on Charles Arthur Floyd, a bank robber with multiple murders under his belt, who was nicknamed Pretty Boy Floyd. Floyd was chased and killed by Purvis and a group of agents on October 22, 1934, marking another successful mission for the DOI. The DOI kept chasing public enemy number 1, one after another. They killed Chicago-born Lester Gillis, nicknamed Babyface Nelson, and sent Alvin Karpis to prison. Both were murderers and bank robbers. In January 1925, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, known as Al Capone, became the head of what was known as the Chicago Outfit, a giant mob that controlled and operated many illegal businesses and institutions across the U.S. Capone's crimes were executed with ultimate secrecy. In 1934, he was finally jailed, but for tax evasion, not the multiple murders he committed. On July 1, 1935, the Division of Investigation was renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In Sicily, an island that has witnessed many occupations and invasions, the main inhabitants formed closed groups to defend themselves and repulse foreign interference. Such groups grew in power, took up arms, and became the Mafia. The Mafia's common code was called Omerta, which prohibits telling anyone outside the group about their activities. This code maintained high levels of secrecy regarding their movements and plans. During World War II, Britain and America needed logistical information about the island prior to invading it, leading them to deal with Mafia members. The fascist Prime Minister of Italy, Benito Mussolini, declared war on the Sicilian Mafia. He was winning it, causing a mass wave of immigration. Members of the Mafia spread across Europe and reached America, where they mostly settled in New York. Charles Lucky Luciano, a Sicilian immigrant, was the mastermind of the National Crime Syndicate, which brought together Italian, Irish, and Jewish crime families. He also was the creator of Murder, Inc., which aimed to kill enemies and informers. Luciano was detained in Clinton Correctional Facility Maximum Security Prison in Dannemora, New York, for running a prostitution ring. Luciano then assisted the Department of the Navy by giving them information about the sabotage of the French ship SS Normandy, which was burned in New York City's port 2 months after the Pearl Harbor attack. Luciano controlled the New York harbor as a member of the Sicilian Mafia. In exchange for his information on the ship, he was given his freedom but deported back to Sicily. After his deportation, Luciano headed a conference at the Hotel Nacional Havana, where he gathered America's top crime bosses to brainstorm methods to make more money. With him at the conference was Vito Genovese, Luciano's partner in many crimes. But their friendship soon ended after Genovese told Luciano that he was aiming to take his place as the boss of all bosses. A fight arose between Luciano and Genovese, who tipped off the U.S. government that Luciano was working on a narcotics trade plan between America and Cuba. The director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Harry Anslinger, asked Cuba to detain Luciano. The order was initially refused, which caused the U.S. to enforce a medical embargo on Cuba. The Cuban police then deported him to Italy, where he was imprisoned. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was another member of Luciano's gang. Siegel allied with Meyer Lansky, and they were both responsible for multiple murders. Siegel invested in the Las Vegas Strip, building his own hotel and casino, which was called the Flamingo. His girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was known as the Queen of the Mob due to her multiple relations with gang members. Siegel was mysteriously assassinated, giving Flamingo's ownership to Lansky, who became a huge force in the Vegas gambling world. In 1951, Virginia Hill stood before a U.S. Senate committee investigating organized crime. In what was known as the Kefauver hearings, the investigations were televised, gaining mass viewership and interest. The hearings featured more than 600 gangsters, including Frank Costello, who was now in charge of the Luciano crime family.
You must have in your mind some things you've done that you can speak of to your credit as an American citizen. If so, what are they?
Paid my tax.
Lawyer Robert Kennedy, nicknamed Bobby, became interested in fighting organized crime after watching the hearings, despite the name of his father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., being mentioned a couple of times. Joseph Kennedy had a relationship with Frank Costello, who helped him ship bootlegged whiskey. Despite his father's dealings with gangsters, Robert chose a different path, becoming the leader of the anti-mafia faction in the federal government. Costello paid a bail of $25,000 to attend the wedding of Rosalie Pravacci and Salvatore Bill Bonanno, who came from 2 prominent New York crime families. New York City's crime families were known as the Five Families: Bonanno, Lucchese, Luciano, Gambino, and Pravacci. Along with the Buffalo, New Orleans, and Tampa mobs, and Chicago's outfit, they all fell under one governing body called the Commission. Vito Genovese took advantage of Costello's presence and sent a hitman to assassinate him so he could finally become the boss of all bosses. The hitman thought he killed him, but in fact Costello survived. The police investigated Costello's belongings, revealing his relation to the Vegas hotels and casinos. Costello was sent back to Italy and imprisoned. Genovese was now in charge of the Luciano crime family. As frequent felonies were making the news, Sergeant Edgar Croswell, a retired New York State police official, and Robert Kennedy were starting to get suspicious about the existence of a mafia. Croswell's suspicions led him to track a meeting organized by the mafiosa in Apalachin, New York, where they gathered to discuss taking control over ports and smuggling routes. Croswell surrounded the mansion where they were meeting and placed 60 suspected members in custody. After Croswell's success made the news, Hoover was shocked. He'd always insisted that no mafia existed and that crimes were individual.
He used to frequent some places in Manhattan that were mob controlled. One of them was the Stork Club. And the Stork Club at the time was bugged and wired, because the owner of the Stork Club, a lot of celebrities would come in there. He would wire and bug these people and actually extort them or have information on them. So he happened to catch Hoover and his boyfriend on tape in the bathroom doing some stuff that they shouldn't have. And they held it over Hoover's head. And that was one incident that caused Hoover to never admit that there was a mafia.
In 1960, as Robert Kennedy's brother John was preparing for his presidential run, he dated Judy Campbell, who was also in a relationship with Sam Giancana, the commander of the mob. This triangular relationship was spotted and surveyed by Hoover. John F. Kennedy triumphed at the Democratic National Convention, bringing him closer to the presidency and raising Sam Giancana's hopes of having more control and presidential backup. John F. Kennedy and his Republican rival, Vice President Richard Nixon, met on September 26, 1960, for a debate on CBS. In the debate, mafiosos saw an opportunity to reach the White House by supporting and pushing one of the candidates to become president. At this time, the music industry was thriving, especially with the rise of rock music. The industry was quickly overtaken by organized crime. Mafia members set up radio stations and collected payola, which entailed having artists pay for having their songs boosted on air. Nixon got support from Jimmy Hoffa, president of the labor union International Brotherhood of Teamsters, who had been previously accused of bribery and dealing with organized crime. John F. Kennedy won the 1960 presidential election, a result Hoover did not welcome but accepted. Hoover also despised the anointment of Robert Kennedy as Attorney General. He felt Robert lacked expertise and was only hired for being the president's brother. Hoover had many records for JFK regarding his relations with the Mafia and his girlfriend Judith Campbell. As Robert Kennedy started his war on organized crime, he bypassed the FBI by authorizing the Justice Department's Organized Crime and Racketeering Section. This led Hoover to blackmail Robert with tapes and records of his father's affiliations with Mafia members Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli. Robert was not aware of his father and brother's affiliations and relations, leading him to be surprised. Hoover then revealed to the Kennedy brothers their father's affiliations with Frank Sinatra, who was close to Giancana and had a shared benefit of singing on his Vegas Strip. Robert Kennedy was informed that the Central Intelligence Agency was partnering with Giancana and Roselli to assassinate Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. The Kennedys could not refute such an act, since it had been agreed upon back during the term of the preceding president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. This led Hoover and Robert Kennedy to state that the Justice Department must no longer participate in any CIA activities. In 1962, at the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Joseph Valachi sat with his fellow inmate, Vito Genovese. After sensing that Genovese wanted him dead, Valachi made plans to kill a third inmate, Joseph Di Palermo, who he assumed would be the executioner of Genovese's order. Valachi picked up an iron pipe and lunged at Di Palermo from behind. As the man dropped to the floor, it turned out that he was not Di Palermo, but an inmate called Joseph Salp, who had no relation whatsoever to Genovese. Anticipating a death sentence for killing Salp, Valachi chose to break the code of Omerta and become an informer. Valachi disappeared into federal protective custody. Valachi underwent hundreds of hours of interviews, revealing secrets and stories about the Mafia that no one outside the group had known before. The Valachi interrogation sparked a clash for credit between Robert Kennedy and Hoover, leading the latter to attempt to prevent the release of the Valachi Papers, a book written by Peter Moss, Kennedy's friend. Hoover took the matter to court and eventually lost the case. The Valachi Papers ended up getting released. Valachi testified before the U.S. Senate's McClellan Committee on Organized Crime in October 1963. The Valachi hearings, as they were called, were on national television. Just as the fight against organized crime was looking good, the surprising assassination of JFK on November 22, 1963, by a lone gunman named Lee Harvey Oswald brought things to a pause. Robert Kennedy first suspected Hoffa was behind the assassination, hiring Oswald as his hitman, but no evidence confirmed his suspicion. A nightclub owner named Jack Ruby managed to bypass security and kill Oswald. Investigators discovered that Ruby had connections with the Mafia.
Okay, so you think the Italian Mafia worked with Lee Harvey Oswald to kill Kennedy?
Yeah, now I don't know if they directly worked with Oswald. I mean, Jack Ruby, was certainly associated with us.
Okay, right, because Jack Ruby was the one that killed Oswald after he was apprehended. He walked up to him and killed him right there in front
as
of
he was
everybody.
going to a court appearance. He was in custody, Oswald.
The death of JFK made Lyndon Johnson president. This led to the resignation of Robert Kennedy, who had no upper hand over Hoover without his brother's backup. On June 5, 1968, after winning the California presidential primary, Robert Kennedy, now a U.S. Senator, was assassinated as he was going backstage following his victory speech.
Oh my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot. And another man, a Kennedy campaign manager.
In 1972, Hoover was found dead in his bedroom from what seemed to be hypertensive cardiovascular disease. After his death, many telephone recordings were found, which he'd been ready to use as leverage if he felt his power was in danger. The death of Hoover led the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, to investigate the inner workings of the FBI and the CIA as well. The committee discovered that the FBI and CIA were illegally opening average citizens' mail and eavesdropping on their telephones. The committee also confirmed the CIA's hiring of Giancana and other mafia killers to attempt to assassinate Castro. The committee revelations triggered a series of assassinations, leading to the death of Giancana, Roselli, and Hoffa, as the mafia was afraid they would break the Omerta code after being caught. The Bonanos, one of the largest mafia families, had been infiltrated by FBI agent Joseph Pistone, who volunteered to spend 5 years within the mafia, risking his life for precious insight and information. Pistone finished his mission successfully, revealing many connections in the underground world of the mafia, and managed to come out alive. The mafia was weakened after the death of many of its leading members and being exposed by the FBI and Robert Kennedy. It was left to lurk on a single personal level with much less impact than it ever had before.